To get started, we do still have a couple folks hopefully joining us. Brian was not here last week, as was Tanisha.
Oh shoot, that was Brian that was with us in last class.
Oh.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean,
He might just not know where to go.
yeah,
Oh, okay.
I should have put two and two together.
I know,
there.
I
It just clicked to me too.
Okay, well, maybe he'll. I mean, I did send out that original email that had what building we're
He
in
should
and
be here
kind of.
unless he's dropping the class or something.
Okay. Well, we'll see. He's signed up for everything, so he got on board with everything from last week. So I'm assuming he's still in. So maybe he'll find his way here. And I'm not sure about Stephanie, is the other one who was here last week. So, but we'll go ahead and get started because why not? Why wait? Why wait? You're here, right? The cool kids are all here. So before we get started with tonight, I always like to start each week by just kind of opening up the floor. If there's anything, any questions you have, concerns you have, things related to the work from the past week or what we did a week ago. Yes.
So I don't think I fully understand. I mean, I do understand what PLN looks like what it is, but I couldn't figure out like what it was supposed to look like.
You mean just the actual physical appearance of it?
Yeah, because I saw Pinterest was one of the things, so I used Pinterest to hold the things that I was interested in, and then I just linked it to the Wix page. Is that the way you're supposed to do it?
You can do it that way. I mean, for instance, this last week's, it was about finding those like two opposing viewpoints on some topic of interest. So, you know, you could get those on a Pinterest and then pin it, but you could also, if you're doing it, say, through Wix, probably the easiest type of page to set up is like a blog page. And then what you could do is just make each of those a blog entry where you can put in your commentary and put in a link to whatever the content is that you found. If you want to have a little more control over the visual look of it, you can set it up as just a regular web page, in which case you can just paste in the links and do your own formatting. And if you want to get involved in sort of doing more customization of how it looks. So I would say either way. I mean, I think using Pinterest probably is just putting an extra link into things that doesn't necessarily have to be there. Like you can gather the content on your Wix page just like you're gathering it on the Pinterest. And so putting the link to the Pinterest from your web page just means sort of one more set of links to go through to get to the eventual content, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, I mean, I'll be taking a look. I glanced at a couple of them. I usually don't look at work until the class where it's due is done so that people have a chance to get everything in. I glanced at a couple of them, but I can take a look, and if I see suggestions or things like that. Next week and the following week, we are going to be talking about graphic design, which is sort of the closest we're going to come to talking about web design too, because web design is basically interactive graphic design. So coming out of that, if you have ideas about something you want to do in terms of formatting your Wix page to make it more user-friendly or more visually attractive or something, you can do so. So did that answer your question? Okay. Or I can. Did you post the link to it on the assignment to the Wix page? Okay. Yeah, because then I can link it directly from there and take a look at it. So, other things, topics of interest, weird things that happened this week.
One quick thing on the link to submit the website link.
Yeah.
There wasn't like a submit button; it just plops in there and it says like continue editing or whatever. I just wanted to make sure you actually got the link. If it just shows like a open page not being.
Yeah, what ends up happening, it is a little weird because I used an assignment to submit that, which is a little strange because you're not really submitting an assignment, you're just submitting the link. Mm-hmm. So if you put that link in the sort of just the text, like you're not like,
shows up still?
Yeah, if it shows up in just, and some people manage to get it as an actual hyperlink. Other people just had the text in there, but that's fine too because I can copy and paste that and use that too. So as long as, you know, in the submission text, like if there's notes or whatever it's called, as long as it's in there. I mean, yeah, the actual assignment page, it's not like you're submitting a document or anything. And actually, while we're on that subject of the Wix, what I will be doing this week then is I'm going to put a page at the top of our class Moodle that has everybody's links in it. And we'll just be asking you at some point just to double check that the link is correct. I mean, I'll double check them too. But that way, if you want to check out what other people are doing with their PLNs, we'll have that as a master resource where everyone can go in and quickly get to everybody else's PLN pages. So I'll be posting that sometime over the course of this week once everybody gets their links submitted. Anything else? Space elevators, EM drives. Oh no.
It wasn't even my fault this time. I mean, like, really. Like, I was in the passing lane, and now I make an effort not to go above 80. Don't go above 80. It's like, once you hit 85, then you're really in trouble. Because it's like constant practice driving.
Yeah.
So I always just keep it at 80, safe. And I was in the passing lane because it was like empty. And then I saw this guy coming up on my butt, and I was like, all right, I guess I'll move out of his way, and he'll speed right by me. And I was like, okay, cool. Now he's the fastest one going. So if someone's gonna get clocked, it's gonna be him. So I was like, I'll stay behind him. And then there was a police officer, and I saw him, and I was like, fuck. And he just pointed at me, and I was like, why? I wasn't the one that was going fast. I was just behind them. But apparently radars are not good at
Right, distinguishing,
yeah, but he was just like, I didn't see any white SUV, and I was like, you asshole. Like, you saw it, and as soon as I went home, I was like, I'm gonna buy a dash cam.
the only speeding ticket I've gotten was coming down Route 8 at like 1 in the morning. I had played a gig up in Winstead, so I was coming home. Route 8 was empty. There was not another car in sight. You know, 4-lane. 1 in the morning, and I was probably not going that fast, but probably because I was the only car out there. I came by, and right as I was coming by him, I saw like all the dash lights turn on and everything, and I was like, oh, it's like, really? Just let me get home. So, yeah. So, all right. Well, another thing that I should point out while we're sort of in this mode is, if you didn't notice, every week on the Moodle, we're all signed up for Remind, so that's one way you can get in touch with me if you have questions. There is also my email link on the Moodle. You can always get in touch with me that way if you have questions. But in the interest of just sort of overloading you with ways that you can get in touch with me, I do also every week at the bottom of each week's thing put sort of an open forum, so that if you have questions or concerns or anything like that, maybe if it's something that's not individual, but maybe you have a question that you think might affect everyone in the class, feel free to use that forum as well. And I check, well, actually I get notifications if anybody posts there, but I do also check in on that regularly as well. So hopefully, you know, because we do spend an entire week away from each other, and that can be a long time when we're working on stuff, you've got plenty of ways to get in touch with me, and I do everything I can to respond as quickly as I can. So, you know, feel free to contact me through any of those means at any time if you've got any questions. All right, so moving forward, tonight we basically have 2 main topics for the evening, although they are related. The first one we're going to be talking about is a method for doing instructional design. I don't know if any of you have had any experience with an actual model for instructional design. There's a lot of them out there. We're going to be looking at one called EDT, which obviously that stands for some things, and that's one of the things we're going to learn. The EDT model has been around for quite a while. It's pretty useful. It's not perfect. I don't think there is probably a perfect model out there. So we are going to talk a little bit about a couple of its weaknesses, just so that you can be aware of them and use and address them as possible. But we're going to be using the EDT model and or parts of it as we go through most of the projects and sub-projects that we're doing. We're not going to probably do a full ADDIE process on every little thing we do, but going back to one of my main themes from last week, I want to know that when you leave this class, that regardless of a specific technology that you're using or a specific situation you're in, that you've got some good foundational strategies that can kind of be applied across a whole range of situations. So having an instructional design model in your pocket that you can refer to is going to be something that you'll find useful whether you're planning a single class, whether you're planning an entire unit, whether you're looking at an entire curriculum, or anything along those lines. So we're going to take a look at that tonight, and part of your work for next week is going to be to begin to construct, using the ADDIE model, a plan for the Moodle project, which you're going to be one of our major projects. So that's part number one tonight. Part number two is going to be about Moodle Cloud itself. Hopefully everybody was able to get signed up with Moodle Cloud either last week or over the course of the last week. Tonight's going to be kind of a nuts and bolts introduction to Moodle. So we'll be looking at how you add a new class. We're going to be creating a dummy class, a test class on each of your sites that you can use just to mess around, so that you're not having to mess around in your actual project site, which you're also going to be creating. So tonight will be mainly, that'll be our technical element tonight. Our integration tonight will be looking at Moodle as a learning management system and what that means. For those of you that have used something like Google Classroom or Microsoft Teams or some of those other things, you'll probably see a lot of similarities between those and Moodle. We're just using Moodle because it's another one to use. And as I said, this particular version of Moodle is free. So even if you're not in a school system or you don't have access to an LMS, you can use Moodle on your own for free to a certain extent. So that's what we'll be doing here. So instructional design model, and then some practical hands-on with Moodle just to get started on that. We will leave tonight by just going over the work for next week, which is basically going to center on getting your Moodle project started. So that's going to be a little bit of design work and a little bit in the Moodle itself. And then next week we will move on to talking about the technology integration plans and graphic design. So the graphic design will be the hands-on creative part, and the TIP will be the integration part of things. So that is our overview. So any questions so far? All right, I'm doing all right? Okay. So, and I am going to do, I know last week we talked about how, because of those of you coming from another class, we can't really start early, but I am going to do what I can to hopefully get you guys out of here a little earlier than 9:45 each night, if at all possible. So, but if I start going too quickly, then please tell me to stop. All right, so really quickly, and there's actually somewhat of a ulterior motive for this as well. If you have not already, it looks like most of you are, but if you can go to our class Moodle, the second item under the materials and resources is a quick poll, and I mean quick. It is a single question, just to get a basic sense of something related to ADDIE. So if you can, click on that, and it will take you probably all of about 5 seconds to actually take the poll. All right, boom, that was fast. One of the things that I'm going to try to do over the next several weeks, even if some of it is a little artificial, is I'm going to try to build into each week's class a couple of the things that Moodle can do, just so you get a chance to actually see some of this stuff in action. So granted, I probably could have just asked this really quickly out loud and gotten the same sort of feedback, but just to give you a bit of an idea, this is the kind of thing that you can plug into something like Moodle. It's a great way to get a quick read on a class. It's anonymous, so you don't have to worry about students worrying about knowing, who is this or who's that. But if you get a chance to use it, look at this. So that is great because that gives me a piece of information that I did not know when we came in here. So that lets me know sort of what I need to do next, which is to talk about ADDIE, obviously. So I'll pull this up here because this will be something for us to look at. So the whole point of this, as I said, is to have a structure in place whenever you're having to design something that is instructional in nature. You have to do this all the time, right? How many of you had to write a lesson plan, right? So you pretty much have to if you're going through the TVAL process or whatever your district calls it or things like that. That essentially is an instructional design process. If you think about, what are some of the typical things that show up on a lesson plan? Objectives. So what you want the students to know when they get done with the class.
Resources needed, materials needed.
Okay, the materials that are needed in order to teach the class. Essential questions. We all love essential questions, don't we? Is anyone else using the I can statements like crazy? Yeah, Region 10 people, we definitely are. So, yeah, maybe just basic information about what the class is, right? Where does this lesson fall in the scope of the larger unit that you're teaching? What standards are you drawing from, right? That's a huge one these days too. Are pretty much, I know we've got different subject areas here. Is everyone pretty much now on national level standards that they use for teaching in your subject area? If you're not a teacher, it doesn't really matter. But I know, like, the arts finally went to sort of a unified national arts education standards about, it wasn't fully adopted until about 4 or 5 years ago. But I know, like, science is now using what do they call it, the next generation science standards. What's that?
It's fun stuff.
That's what I've heard. Are you a fan or not?
Sure.
Can I get a different reading on that? Yeah, and math has been undergoing all of these changes with new math, I guess, or I don't know what, but there's like new national math standards, I think. So anyway, so sort of knowing what connections you're trying to make, what standards you're trying to feed into, and so on. So, a lesson plan you can think of, especially if your district kind of has an established lesson plan form that they ask you to use, that's kind of an instructional design process in miniature. It's making you think through what you're trying to achieve, how you're going to achieve it, who you're achieving it with, what you're going to need in order to achieve it, how you're going to know whether the lesson was successful or not, all of that information. But what usually is not focused on is sort of how do you get to the information on that page, right? Here's a page, fill it in. So you go in and you just try to fill things in as good as best as possible. So something like ADDIE is sort of that process, but just a little more structured and a little bit more carefully laid out in terms of a do this, then answer these questions, then do this, and then do this final thing here. As I said, there's a lot of other models out there, but ADDIE is one of the ones that shows up more often than not in situations like this. So the first thing that I guess we've got to do is figure out what the A, the D, the the I, and the E stand for. So anyone want to take a wild guess at the A? What do you think you would do first in the process of designing instruction? Whether that's a single class or a unit, what would we do that starts with an A that you would usually... Assessment, that's a good guess. Something related to assessment in a way. What are you doing when you're assessing something? Without using the word in the definition. What's that? Okay, that would indicate that we have something already in place that we're using. That's getting a lot closer. All right, okay. there's another A word that when you're kind of looking at data and trying to get information out of it. Analyze, right? We got it.
I wasn't close. Thanks for supporting.
All right. So the A generally is to analyze. And this is sometimes the step that gets shortchanged. A lot of people will jump to the later steps first, but what happens in analysis is to really step back before you start saying how you're going to teach something or anything like that, and to say, get a really good sense of what it is you're trying to teach and why. Is there a problem you're trying to solve? Things like that. All right. So we're gonna try to fill in some specifics on this down the road. So I don't want to talk too much about it. But the first step is to analyze, find out where you are, and so on. All right. Now we have 2 Ds. If we've analyzed our situation, what could we do with a D that would be next? Okay. We're getting like the first syllable dis is correct. So we have design. There we go. All right. So once you've looked at your situation, then the next step is to figure out, develop a plan for how you're going to address the thing that you've analyzed. Design is not actually making stuff. It's still in the planning phase. So we actually haven't done anything related to what we're actually going to be doing in the classroom yet. We're just getting a really, really clear idea of where we are and the things that we're going to need in order to get where we want to get to. Okay? All right, the next D, I'll just give this one to you unless you guys really want to fight. Good, yeah, actually develop.
Googled it.
No,
I'm just kidding.
Boom. All right. So yeah, so now you know where you're trying to go. You've got where we are, where we're trying to go, and this is the actual nuts and bolts. This is when you make the handouts and stuff like that. So this is where a lot of the work is going to happen. All right, so we've now developed our instructional unit. What would we do next with it? Close.
Implement.
What's the implement? Yeah, they're similar, but implement actually means... So the implement, it means we're actually going to do the thing now. We're going to take all the materials we created and we're actually going to put it into use and see how it all works. And what do we always do at the end? Evaluate. My handwriting is actually better on this than it is when I write on paper. I'm surprised. So all those like signature pads now that you have to sign, like I don't even know why they ask you to do that, because my signature ends up just looking like a couple of bent lines. But I guess that's good enough to be my signature. I don't know. I don't see how that would stand up in court. But. All right, so here are our 5 steps for this particular model. We're going to look at a situation. We are then going to go through a design process. Then we're going to develop. Then we're going to implement our process. And then we're going to step back and evaluate it. All right, so that's ADDIE in a nutshell. So, yes?
Is ADDIE similar to like the engineering design process?
Possibly. I don't know off the top of my head specifically what that process entails.
It's pretty much just that, except the one part that's like missing is prototype, so like testing it and then doing it again.
So it's interesting that you bring that up. Hold that thought for a little later, because that is one of the acknowledged weaknesses of this particular plan. So we will circle back to that for sure. All
I
right?
also have a story for that too.
You what?
I said I also have a story for that too.
Oh, yeah?
What we say about that.
Okay. All right. So, so let's do this just to kind of break things up a little bit. What do we have tonight? 7. We're only 7. We should have 10. People are dropping left and right. is just quickly. I purposely didn't go into a lot of detail on these. What I want to do is have you guys get together in 2 groups, and just quickly, you can take a blank piece of paper or something like that as a group. I just want you to brainstorm for each of these 5 areas. I don't know exactly what to call them, whether it would be activities or points of concern, like things that you would discuss or determine in each of these areas. Just sort of going off of the name and understanding the rough overview of this process. So like in the analysis phase, what kinds of things do you think you would either be doing, or what questions would you be trying to get answered, or what information do you think you would need to know? And then, same thing for the design phase, same thing for developing, implementing, and evaluating. Just to see if sort of on your own, just brainstorm a little bit about what kinds of things you think are going to fall into each of these categories. All right? So to mix it up this week. I know last week was sort of the 4 of you and the back row back there. So let's just divide yourselves up differently this week somehow. It'll be 1 group of 4 and 1 group of 3. And just take, 5 or 10 minutes. I don't want to take a huge amount of time on this, but think about what kinds of things you think would belong in each of these 5 parts of this process in terms of what you would do, what you need to know, what questions you would ask, things like that. So see what you come up with.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
I think we're. You need to look at your curriculum and see what your targets are going to be.
I know. Or it makes it a little bit thinking harder. You can see some really deep design. By the end of 7th grade, you will be able to read. Yeah. You'll be able to write narrative. No, they're national standards. We don't pay the field. Social studies has such a hard time getting national standards because, in history in Alabama.
I mean, maybe that's good. I think
Yeah,
that's
alright.
kind of.
That's a lot of different reasons.
Oh, yeah.
What are the bad things?
All right, design.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Design and develop kind of like the distinction between like I don't know. When I think design, I think design would like
I'm thinking like analyze and like
developing like a database and then
you see like design to me initially the story board version where you're just
yeah.
so like you're gonna like this is like you want this to happen, you want this to happen, you want this to happen. Shit's gotta happen here, make it happen here,
Yeah.
and that's where developing is. So like big stuff
So yeah, the designing is like developing your units. Planning and developing development. Your worksheets. I think it's important.
I don't that
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
so
think-
like
The first three steps are like collaboration.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
I think it was partially their schedule. We did like a limiting schedule, and we did not
They're even days they go to the same classes.
So like a lot of what we did was
Some
like
Yeah.
made this rank
and
unit.
they're on
And
this.
these boys usually do different.
So I see
More like that.
those kids
I
get
think
together, just like sharing stuff. But
yeah,
they
it's
are
more
probably have
more
like
sharing is very heavy units.
I don't
now.
know other.
Yeah.
And then
Do you have a trade
a lot of our field days
Do you do like
Hey, bud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
not that good, probably more of a point. Like,
Yeah.
Like, I
Have a
know
good
this
trip,
one,
yeah.
and I got it back literally in the 45 seconds.
Really?
And it clearly don't make it look that one. Like when you get your third week, your first year, you have to do like these reflective papers and go to conference.
So they're almost good islands, right?
They're always with me. Always. Always. Yeah.
So you got some
They give you a
Yeah.
mentor.
All right, how are we doing with our
So
Addy brainstorm? Addled brainstorm?
That sounds about right.
We're good, addled? Our addled brains trying to come up with a brainstorm for Addy. So, all right, well, let's see what you came up with. And my guess is that probably a lot of what you've come up with is going to be right on target. But there may be some things that I want to add in or maybe redirect just a little bit just so you have clarity on this process. So let's start with analyze. What things do you think you're doing when you're in the analysis process? What questions do you need answered? What information do you need to know? What sorts of things? Just either group.
Pre-assessments is what we've covered before. My kind of question, concern is like when I give a pre-assessment, I generally don't have time to design and develop afterwards.
Yep.
So there's an element of kind of predicting anecdotally where you think they're probably going to be.
Okay.
And it's not as specific as you would like when you're designing and developing by necessity.
Sure. Yeah, and there's going to be, we all know how the real world goes. Do we have time to sit down for every single lesson we do and go through? No. A lot of times this tends to kick in more when you're doing either initial curriculum development or when you're looking sort of at a unit level where you've got some more time to like sit down with your coworkers and you're working out sort of a new direction or you've identified because of your scores on the PSATs or whatever that there's a particular topic that needs addressing. But yeah, that element of pre-assessment, it may not be a pre-assessment that's given in a classroom, but some element of that, because what does a pre-assessment tell you?
It's already known.
What's already known, and probably more importantly,
It's not known.
what's not known. You're looking for the problem areas. And I'm very upfront with my students about this when we do pre-tests. I'm like, I want to see where the holes are. I want to see the blank questions. I want to see the places where we need to work. So that kind of a thing. All right, what else? What else do we need to know in analysis?
You talked about looking at your curriculum and depending on what the discipline is, like what you're teaching, it may be like a standards or like in science, like disciplinary core ideas or like whatever your specific subject area has as its focus. You're going to want to look at that for your unit or for like a particular. Again, I keep going back to science because it's what I teach. But we'll get like an overall unit, and then we get like within that unit, you got to teach this, this, and this. And there's like 8 different DCIs in each one. So you want to look at those and figure out, okay, what am I going to do here?
Right, okay. So pulling in your standards, like we were just talking about, you certainly want to know that. That's going to tie into this. What else? Something from over on this side.
We talked about, I guess, pre-assessment too, like what's already known. You need to know what the students already know.
Okay,
That kind of stuff.
all right. What about like an audience analysis or a population analysis? Why would that impact a design or an instructional unit?
You mean the actual students? Like,
Yeah, like,
analysis of your student body in your classroom?
yeah,
I think based on their ability, what they can do in a given honors class versus
okay, sure. Is it, where are the students coming from in terms of previous experience? How old are the students? Is it, are you at a high school? Are you at an elementary? I mean, that's an extreme example, but obviously the same topic at a high school and an elementary school, you're going to approach the process from very different directions, right? So kind of knowing that as well. Anything else to throw in here? We've actually kind of hit all the major marks with this. So yeah, it's I like how they give this, like I'm going to write with the finger. So you want to know your audience. You want to know what standards you're going for. That idea of pre-assessment, which that really, for me, what that's helping you do is identify the problem. You're looking for, if we're going to design instruction for something, you don't design an instructional unit if your students already know the thing that you're trying to teach. I mean, if they already know how to add 2 + 2, there's no problem. You don't need to instruct them. So instruction is usually about identifying what's the problem you're trying to address. And that's what pre-assessments can give you. And a pre-assessment can be, I mean, in this day and age with all the standardized testing that they're doing, it could be information from a previous year or from something like that. I know at the high school level, every year they publish the scores that our students get in certain areas. And if you're an English teacher or things like that, they get very specific targets, like the students need to do better in this particular area. So that's a pre-assessment, even though it's a pretty major pre-assessment. Yeah, so things like that. I'm going to see if there's anything. Yeah, I mean, learning outcomes. We talked about that, what you want them to do. Right. So all of that, we haven't created any materials yet. We haven't even thought about how we're going to teach this. It's really the analysis phase. It's just understanding the problem, really wrapping your brain around what are we trying to fix, who are we trying to fix it with, what are the standards that we're working within, what are our constraints, understanding the situation. So kind of this thing here, understanding the problem, all the rest of this kind of feeds into that. All right? Anything else anyone wants to add in terms of that? So for instance, with our Moodles, one of the things you're going to be asked to do this week is this. We're going to keep the Moodles relatively contained just because of the scope of this class and all the other stuff we have to do. but we're going to be looking for like a 5-lesson, if you want to think of it that way, Moodle. Some instructional thing that can be broken up into roughly sort of 5 segments. So you're going to be thinking this week about what that should be. If you're in a classroom and it can be something that you know needs to be addressed, and you think you can use the materials from this project to actually address that in your classroom, then I encourage you to do that. If you're not in a classroom or you don't really have a situation that's going to lend itself to that, then just think about, either what you do for work or situations you've been in, and think about, identifying a problem and a population that you would like to address with the Moodle. Who are the people that would come to your Moodle in order to learn whatever it is that you want them to learn? Okay, let's move on. Design. What happens in design? What's going on there? Why don't you guys kick us off?
We talked about like a lesson timeline, so different lessons within a unit.
Yeah, so like timeline, sequencing of things that you're going to do. Okay, great.
We said the same thing. We just called it storyboarding.
Storyboarding, yep, that's another term that that comes up a lot with that. What else? Is that all you need to know? Is just what sequence you're going to go in?
We said, I don't know if this will make sense, but like what it looks like. So what the lessons will kind of, I don't know if that's more in development, but what the lessons will look like, kind of.
Yeah, you mean like actually physically, visually what they're going to look like, or?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you can also, even if you're not using technology, everything is kind of an interface, if you want to use that term. Like somehow you're interfacing the content with the students, whether that's handouts, whether that's videos, whether that's, a Moodle, whether that's audio clips, videos. So yeah, kind of thinking along the lines of, what are the ways that I'm going to deliver this content? What is that going to look like? Anything else? Sort of something similar to that. This is usually, I only know this because I'm very connected to the software our district uses for our curriculum. But kind of along those same lines, but just instructional strategies, right? There's 1,000 different strategies you can use, and a lot of times in a classroom you want to use a bunch of different strategies, right? Because what's the big catchphrase? When you've got a classroom of students and they're not all the same kind of learner, we call that differentiation, right? So you don't want to go into a teaching situation unless you're teaching one student and you really know how that student reacts. You don't want to go in there with just one strategy that you're going to be implementing. All right, and that's one of the advantages that technology gives, is that it's really easy through technology to deliver the same content in a lot of different modes that then your students can kind of figure out which mode works the best for them, or if something doesn't work, they can try something a different way. So yeah, so this one, I'll change colors because I can. So yeah, this idea of storyboarding or timeline, that's one of the key elements of this. You want to know the scope. You need to know how much time you've got to cover with this. One of the things in preparation for next week is I've got a chapter from a book that's about the segmentation principle, which is all about taking something that you want to teach and figuring out how to divide it up into chunks. So that kind of goes along with this. Figuring out how you're going to divide the content up is a piece of this. Instructional strategies, I said. So sort of what types of approaches you're going to use. And then, yeah, I'll use the word interface, but that's really sort of the visual, the look, the style that you're going to use to approach this. What kinds of content do you want to use? One thing that design is not, and I'm glad this didn't come up because these two are probably the two hardest to keep separated from each other, is that at this point we still have not actually created anything. We're still in the mental phase at this point, or we're going mental. I don't know, one or the other. But at this point, we're still just getting our plan ready. We haven't actually done anything with the plan yet. We're just really making sure. So we identify the problem. This is our strategy for how we're going to address the problem. So then that takes us to development, which maybe I just gave too much away. But what's development going to be? The actual creation. I'll go back to blue. So this is actually primarily creating all of your materials. Some people love this phase, other people hate this phase. But this is where the handouts get made. This is where the videos get made. This is where the Moodle gets put together. This is where you put together the materials for the projects that the students are going to need. All of that kind of stuff. So this is the phase where we're actually putting everything and making it real, getting everything together. I heard some discussions going on around developing. What else came up in the development piece of it for people?
We were talking about this being where you put together your individual lesson plan, your individual formative assessment, and your like day-to-day grinding out stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this would be, here you would say, I need a pre-assessment, in a way. This would be where you would actually create the pre-assessment. Does that make sense? So this would be where you would decide you need one, or that's a strategy you're going to use. And then in the creation of the materials, that is definitely then where the actual assessment will get made. And if you're going to deliver it online or on paper or both or whatever. So, and that's, as we go through this course, the pair of weeks where we're doing like graphic design one week and we're doing video a couple of weeks and we're doing audio a couple of weeks, that's really geared towards this development, trying to improve the quality of the materials that we're creating. Once we know what materials we're looking for, then my hope is that we can sort of generally bump up the quality and the effectiveness of all of those materials. All right, so last two then, implementing. What did we get with that?
Actually doing it.
Yeah, in a nutshell, do it, just do it. All right, so this is where the plan actually goes into effect. Now, this also should include, and this kind of ties over to the technology integration plans we're going to be developing. It's not just about the plan, but also if there's any additional training that needs to happen. If you want your students to use, in my case, there's a program called NoteFlight that's an online notation program. My lesson may ask them to use NoteFlight, but in the implementation phase, I need to also make sure that they know how to use NoteFlight. Even if that's not the lesson, if they're going to be asked to use the technology or do a particular thing in the implementation plan, you need to make sure that you've accounted for that. Or if you're looking at a larger level across a department, you need to make sure that your teachers know how to use the materials that they're going to have to use. So the implementing is the teaching part, but it's also making sure that everybody is prepped with anything that they need to know ahead of going into this. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach there, both focused on the students and the direct learning, but then also on anything they need to learn. All right, and these last couple go kind of quickly because they're kind of self-explanatory, but evaluation would be assessment. Now, assessment of what?
The unit itself, right? Would it be like reflection?
Expand on that just so I'm clear on.
So, like, as the instructor or the teacher, like, you're evaluating your unit, not the learning of the kids, because the learning of the kids would be under implement.
Exactly, right? So that's the thing to keep clear. This is not teaching. This is focused on the design of what's being taught. So an assessment that you would give your students as part of the lesson or the unit, that's implementing, right? That's the doing of the stuff with the students and going through all the materials. This evaluation, what you're evaluating is your program. You want to see whether your program works. So that may tie into the implementation, because one way to test whether a lesson has been successful is to give the students some kind of a post-evaluation or summative evaluation. And then from the results of that, you can evaluate whether student learning took place and whether they met the targets and so on. But it could also include, again, if you're dealing with, say, a department, talking with the teachers. What were their experiences like? What did they struggle with? What did they need to know more of in order to bring the program to the students? Were there additional materials that would have been useful, or approaching something from a different instructional strategy or something along those lines? So just keep that in mind with this, that this evaluation is of the program, not of the students. And that's probably the biggest confusion that happens with that, because as teachers, we tend to focus our evaluation on evaluating the students, but this is a design process, so we're evaluating the design. All right, questions? Comments? Yes?
So this process, it kind of just implies that you just research, you do it, and then you evaluate it, and that's the end of it. It doesn't really tell you to.
Right. There's an implication of this, that if you get to this point and discover something's not working, that there's a bit of a feedback back into the process again. And this actually leads into then the drawback, the major drawback of this. Well, explain what you were talking about before with the engineering design process. What's the
Prototyping. So my job, I'm working on this, we're putting a conference together and making websites and stuff. And every time I would send my project in on a deadline, they'd like rip it to shreds and then give it back to me, tell me to do it again. And I do it again, and the same thing would happen. And then I finally got upset, and I'm like, why do you keep telling me if I hand it in by this specific deadline, you're going to keep sending it back to me? And like, well, that's because like when we're looking at it, we're testing it to see if it works, and then we send it back to you and you update it. But I was looking at it as like failure, and it was like a big thing at my job, because I was just like, I just started. Like, why are you being so mean? And then I thought about it, and I was like, oh yeah, I guess that makes more sense.
Yeah.
You don't just want to just think that, all right, this is it, it's done. Like, there's no updates, because everything needs an update. It's kind of like a patch, like a computer.
right?
So
And I'm so glad you have that story, because that identifies exactly the major drawback of this approach, and people have identified this, and everyone kind of is aware of it, is if you follow this literally, if you really stick to the ADDIE plan, you're going to get all the way out to here before you really know whether all this work you've done is effective or not. And especially if you're looking at a larger scale, like in a department or over an entire school, that's a lot of resources that have probably been used by that point. Money, time, frustration, all that kind of stuff. So what a lot of people will do with this is hybridize it a bit with another style of development called rapid prototyping. That's something more that industry and manufacturing uses. But it's that exact idea that basically you shortchange this process, so that rather than waiting for the whole thing to be implemented before you look at it, back here in the design and the analysis and the development, there's sort of a much quicker feedback loop that happens. And it's exactly that kind of thing. You put something together, you think it's in good shape, you submit it, people try it out, they try to bust holes through it, they try to get it to crash, they try to get it, they push buttons that you wouldn't think people would ever push just to see if they can get the thing to not work. And then you immediately take that information and feed it back in and fix those and feed it back in and fix those. So as we go through this process, one of the ways that we're going to sort of address that in here is that, for example, over this coming week, you're going to be doing basically this piece and a little bit of this piece for your Moodle, but you're going to be making that available to everybody through a forum so that you can get feedback from people. At this point, that's probably the most effective way to get that rapid prototyping, rather than building everything, but you'll get other people's feedback. So at least mentally, people will be trying to poke holes in what you're doing. And just like your experience said, that process is not about criticizing you or trying to make you feel bad. It's about improving the final product. And the more eyes you can get, the more you can get people to try things out. If you've ever done anything with software development, I mean, this process happens thousands and thousands of times as a software is being developed. Yeah.
The reason why the school's doing that is I work at WPI in Worcester, and all of the colleges and schools are kind of like science, like STEM based.
Yeah.
And a lot of the presidents of the schools are now like engineers that were originally engineers and then went into education. So they're kind of building all the schools in the area around like engineering and manufacturing design, but specifically in education and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that really, that ties in really well because that was going to be the next thing. So this is a useful model, and people still use it. I'm not saying that, throw the whole thing out. But as we go through this process, and if you decide to use this process or a modified version of it down the road, just if you're aware that there's that sort of quirk built into it, anything you can do to prototype along the way. If you create some materials, give a initial copy of that to somebody and see whether they interact with it the way you thought they would, or show somebody a movie that you've created and see if they, get the information out of it the way that you want. Because if you can catch those things early on, then by the time you get to the implementation, you should be a little more confident that the quality of what you're doing is going to be that much better, which hopefully then when you get to the evaluation means that final evaluation will be stronger as well. So that's just something to be aware of. But the term in industry is rapid prototyping. So anything you can do to get lots of feedback and just prepare yourself. When I went through the Master's in Ed Tech program here with Dr. Abed, our big final project, we had to actually write a big piece of software for an actual client. And the number of times we went through, and it was all about click everywhere on the screen, anywhere that you think, not even if it's a button, just to see if you can get the program to crash. And it would crash. And then you'd have to figure out, okay, well, a student is going to probably click on that area. So we've got to do something that's going to address that problem. So how do we fix that? And then you do it again, and then you do it again. And the number of times we took something through that process. So we'll keep that in mind as we go. All right, so this is your hour-long introduction, not quite hour-long introduction, into the ADDIE design model. Like I said, as we go through this course, for the larger projects, so for the Moodle and for the technology integration plan, we're going to use this a little bit more completely. But even when we're doing smaller things like creating a video, we might at least do sort of some of the analyze and design elements, just because that'll help inform the video you're making. If you know the audience you're going for, if you know the problem you're trying to solve, and you think a little bit about style and look and things like that, storyboarding, even on a small scale like that, having a model like this in the background is going to help improve the quality of those, even a single piece of material, even if you're not looking at a whole unit or things like that. So we're going to use bits and pieces of this more or less fully kind of throughout this course as we go through the remainder of the time. All right, so I think, I know I do want to get you out of here early, but let's take like a 5-minute break just to let people stand up and whatever, and it'll let me do a quick save of a video. And then we'll shift gears and go into Moodle for the rest of the evening.